Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Ollie Stevenson, and I am the Associate Director for Artificial Intelligence and Emerging Technology Policy here at the Federation of American Scientists. We're joined here today by our great AI and energy and clean energy teams that you can see here on the screen today, who have been supporting the work on this AI and energy sprint. The Federation of American Scientists was founded in 1945 by Manhattan Project scientists who wanted to ensure that policymakers and the public were receiving the best possible information about the risks posed by nuclear weapons. And for nearly 80 years, we have worked to build a world where cutting-edge science, technology, and talent are deployed to solve the biggest challenges of our time and build a healthy, safe, and prosperous society. Today, we work across a huge range of policy areas, including artificial intelligence and clean energy. Artificial intelligence requires both an increasing amount of resources to work in the form of water and power, and is also being deployed to accelerate innovation in energy and environmental fields. Lawrence Berkeley National Lab recently projected that AI could use as much as 12% of US electricity by 2028. And at the same time, we're seeing promising applications for AI in sectors including grid management and clean energy innovation. Last year, we at FAS saw that there was a clear need for actionable policy proposals that we could get into the hands of policymakers. This is something that we as an organization really focus on, trying to get the best scientific information into the hands of people that need it. We reached out to a wide range of experts at the intersection of AI and energy, and based on the applications we received, we've selected a cohort of specialists. Over the past several months, they have been working with us to produce 7 targeted policy memos, the decision makers you can use to steer the policy at the intersection of AI and energy today. In today's session, you'll hear from several of our authors about the ideas that they have developed. We're really grateful that they are able to join us today, and thank you so much to all of them for the work they've done. So a brief introduction for our speakers and their topics. Tamara Nice, who heads Data and Society's Research Institute on Climate, Justice, and Technology, will present on holistic frameworks for measuring and reporting AI's environmental impacts. Then Xiaoli Ren, Associate Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of California, Riverside, along with Adam Weirman, Professor of Computing and Mathematical Sciences at Caltech, and Cecilia Marinan, Tech Policy Associate at the Capor Foundation, will present on actionable policy at local, state, and federal levels to advance AI with less air pollution and healthier outcomes. After that, Dr. Kostas Samaras, the director of the Carnegie Mellon University Scott Institute for Energy Innovation, will present on grid innovation to win the AI race. And then last, but very much not least, Shane Londigan, the Senior Policy Advisor for Innovation at Third Way, will be presenting on AI's grid modernization potential. After each presentation, there will be 5 minutes for Q&A. We encourage everyone here to please ask their questions. You can use the Q&A box to submit questions. Thank you again for joining us, and I would now like to turn it over to our first speaker, Tamara.
Yes, so thank you to Ollie and thank you to FAS for having me present this work, which is a collaboration between me and Emma Strubel, who is a computer scientist at Carnegie Mellon University. And a note before the Q&A that my expertise is more aligned with the participatory focus of our memo. So if you have any technical questions, you should definitely reach out to Dr. Strubel. As Ollie mentioned, I'm Tamara Nice, and I direct the Climate, Technology, and Justice program at Data and Society Research Institute, where I research the relationship between AI, energy infrastructures, and communities. The title of our memo is Holistic Frameworks for Measuring and Reporting AI's Environmental Impacts. And could we go to the next slide, please? As Ollie also mentioned, the IEA is predicting that data center energy use may reach 12% of overall energy consumption in the US by 2028. But we want to drill down into that number, along with related energy forecasts, which are slightly different. So what use cases are actually driving energy consumption, and how can we ensure that we're building data centers for a future that is based on real evidence? We need clear standards for estimating data centers' true energy needs and for measuring and also reporting the specific AI applications that are driving resource consumption. Local and state level bills calling for more oversight of utility rates and economic impacts to ratepayers have received bipartisan support, and our proposal builds on that momentum. Next slide, please. We're drawing on research that Emma Strubel is an author on, proposing a holistic evaluation framework, which establishes 3 categories of environmental impacts arising from AI. 1, computing-related impacts, 2, immediate application impacts, and 3, system-level impacts. Concerns around AI's computing-level impacts, e.g. energy and water use, have become widely known. However, AI's immediate application and system-level impacts, which can arise from the specific use cases to which AI is being applied, and also the broader socioeconomic shifts that result from its use, are poorly understood, despite the fact that there is much greater potential for either societal benefit or harm from those secondary impacts. We recommend that NIST oversee creation of frameworks to measure the full range of AI's environmental impacts, relying on quantitative measurements of the computing and application-related impacts of AI and qualitative data based on engagements with the stakeholders who are most affected by the construction of data centers. The critical data needed to assess the full impacts of AI and data center expansion remains fragmented, inconsistent, or entirely unavailable. States are enacting a patchwork of policy solutions, and some states, like Virginia, are overburdened, which can lead to public pushback. The federal government can help create standards that allow stakeholders to balance the potential costs and benefits of data centers and related energy infrastructures. We have an urgent need to increase transparency and accountability through multi-stakeholder engagement, which can maximize economic benefits while reducing waste. Next slide, please. So to talk a little bit about how we would actually propose this be done, the first recommendation is to develop a database of AI uses and a framework for reporting AI's applications to understand what the drivers are when it comes to environmental impacts. We need to know what we're measuring. Anthropic recently demonstrated a proof of concept that categorizes queries to Claude using the ONET database of occupations. But this was developed essentially to categorize different job types that correspond with human workers, which doesn't necessarily align with current and potential uses of AI. To address this, we recommend that NIST work with relevant collaborators, including the US Department of Labor, to develop a database of AI use cases and applications similar to and building on ONET. And this data could then be used to understand particular AI tasks that are key drivers of resource consumption. Our second recommendation is that NIST can create a consortium to develop a framework for evaluating AI's environmental impact using public participation at every stage. The impacts are obviously falling heavily on communities that are hosting data centers that are powering AI. Without transparent metrics and genuine community input, policymakers cannot balance the benefits of AI innovation against local and regional burdens. Setting up a consortium under a cooperative research and development agreement, consulting with FERC's Office of Public Participation is one strategy that might be effective. Potential activities could include community listening sessions and online comment portals, and might produce plain language materials for the public. The evaluation will consider the number, type, and duration of jobs created by data centers, the effects of tax subsidies on local economies and public services, the placement of transmission lines and repercussions on housing, public parks, and agriculture, the use of eminent domain for data center construction, water use intensity versus local demands, and public health impacts, including those from air, light, and noise pollution. Next slide, please. Our third recommendation is to mandate regular measurement and reporting on relevant metrics by data center operators. It is clear that voluntary ESG reporting is not cutting it. With respect to data centers specifically, the DOE could require that developers who are granted rights to build AI data center infrastructure on public lands perform the relevant measurement and reporting could be a requirement to qualify for any local, state, or federal funding or assistance provided to support build-out of US AI infrastructure. Recommendation 4 is that we incorporate measurements of social cost into AI energy and infrastructure forecasting and planning. Forecasting needs to go beyond just energy use. Models should include predicting energy and related infrastructure needs for transmission, the social cost of carbon in terms of pollution, the effects to ratepayers, and the energy demands from chip production, for example. The Energy Information Administration at the DOE should integrate data on the AI workloads driving data center electricity use into their forecasting models. Agencies specializing in social impacts, such as the Department of Health and Human Services, should model social impacts and communicate those to the DOE for planning purposes. In parallel, FERC should update its new rule on long-term regional transmission planning to include consideration of the social costs corresponding to energy supply, demand, and infrastructure retirement or build-out across different scenarios. Next slide, please. We also recommend that we transparently use federal, state, and local incentive programs to reward data center projects that deliver concrete community benefits. So let's try with a carrot, not just a stick. Grid operators can leverage interconnection queues to incentivize data center operators to justify that they have sufficiently considered the impacts to local communities when proposing a new site. FERC recently approved reforms to processing the interconnected request queue, allowing grid operators to implement a first ready, first served approach rather than a first come, first served approach, wherein proposed projects can be fast-tracked based on their readiness. A similar approach could be used to fast-track proposals that include a clear plan for how they will benefit communities, e.g. through load flexibility, heat reuse, and clean energy commitments grounded in careful impact assessment. And there's a potential for state-level incentives as well, created in conjunction with groups like the National Governors Association. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, our framework proposes establishing standards for measuring and reporting AI's various environmental impacts and social impacts through public participation from the impacted communities, and putting data into action to plan more effectively and to inform government decision-making. Thank you so much.
I'd like to come in with a quick question, if that's okay.
Sure.
I'm interested in economic growth, I think, and national security. I think that's been a big focus of the current administration's agenda. Do you see a trade-off here between economic growth, national security, and the policies that you're proposing, or do you think these are well aligned?
So, these are both really great questions. I think, if we're thinking about, first of all, the economic growth question. So Good Jobs First, which is a small nonprofit, recently put out a report that examined how much different states are losing in subsidies to data center incentives that are being handed out. And so I think the question about economic growth, particularly at a state or local level, versus the interests of data center operators, which are not always going to be in partnership with each other. And so what are the actual economic trade-offs when it comes to local and state level economies? And certainly with the national security issue, I think something that we have to keep in mind is that data centers also are reliant upon larger global supply chains. So the GPUs and all of the hardware and infrastructure that is required for data center build out is still coming from overseas. And so the idea that building data centers on land that is in the US is a way to ensure national security does not necessarily protect us from larger supply chain issues.
Looks like we have another question in the chat. I can just read it out. Hi, thanks for your presentation. I'm curious to know if states are already implementing some of these measures and what has been the feedback from stakeholders. Like, what are some of the implementation hurdles and how are they being handled?
Yeah, so I think one of the issues that we've seen is that it can be very hard to actually weigh the full energy requirements for data centers beforehand. But what we have seen at the state level are calls for more transparency from data center operators. And the other thing that we've definitely seen is a desire to include more public participation in the permitting and earlier in the process so that people are actually aware of what land is being used for data centers and which companies are planning data centers in particular geographic locations. because right now what we've seen is that most of the time communities are not even necessarily aware of which companies are building data centers on land, and it makes it much harder for community pushback to happen in a way that is actually meaningful. And so if there is an earlier intervention, I think that will also help mitigate some of the problems that we've seen in states like Virginia, where you have a lot of people who are quite upset over the growth of data centers and their use of agricultural land and the sort of visible changes in the landscape in tandem with ratepayers being asked to take on an undue burden and too much of the economic responsibility for data center build out. In Oregon, recently, there was a bill that passed that puts data centers in a different ratepayer class, and that can be one way of offsetting some of those costs to ratepayers.
Thank you very much. We have another question from Reed. Have any major tech companies supported the sort of recommendations that you have presented here?
So, large companies, including Microsoft, for example, have had different kinds of community engagement around data center build out. But I think the question of having community feedback on the data center construction process is something that is not typically carried out, no. And so while you might have some sort of philanthropic offset of data center and the data center build out and the potential economic or environmental costs, actually having a meaningful dialogue and public participation earlier in the process, again, is not typical.
I think I saw on the Salesforce last year supporting mandatory disclosures around energy consumption specifically. So that's one example. Yes, let's see. I don't see any other questions. So we still have about 1 more minute for questions if people want to put any in. I'll leave a moment of silence here if anyone wants to add any more questions. Okay, we have one more. With more data center developers looking to secure on-site power sources behind the meter, is there a comprehensive data set of the types of power they're using or planning to use?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think is there a data set that is actually, comparing the use of power sources across data center operators, across regions? I'm not aware of anything that is really tracking anything to that extent, but I am sure that there is a possibility of having a more comprehensive data set for examining different kinds of power use.
Yeah, certainly it is interesting. Just we're kind of in the dark here about where people are, what people are actually planning to build. Okay, I think we are out of time. So thank you so much, Tamara, for that great presentation. And I think we will hand over to our next speaker, Cecilia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Tamara. And thank you for FAS for bringing us together and for the support throughout this process, and everyone on the webinar who's taking the time to listen to our recommendations. My name is Cecilia Marinin. I'm a Tech Policy Associate at the Caper Foundation based in San Francisco. And for the past few months, Chalet Wren, Adam Weirman, and I have been investigating what AI expansion means for public health impacts, environmental impacts, and energy strain, and which policies make the most sense at this point in time to implement on a federal, state, and local level. Next slide, please. So let's zoom out a bit and discuss the patterns that we are seeing more broadly within AI infrastructure expansion. I'm sure many of you have been reading news stories about how data centers are increasingly being placed in dry climates, such as deserts, creating concerns about water scarcity and energy grid strain. And clearly, you can see in this graph that we are at an inflection point where the consumption levels are projected to rapidly and exponentially accelerate. We're at a tipping point where policy intervention is necessary to curb not only the energy depletion these data centers cause, but also the associated public health impacts. Next slide, please. So when discussing the impacts of data centers on communities and their surrounding environments, it's essential that public health implications are not overlooked. In December 2024, Chalet and Adam authored a first of its kind and groundbreaking paper that quantified these data center health harms, projecting that by 2030, the annual public health burden from US data centers is projected to reach up to 20 billion. This harm is not evenly distributed, as companies in Mason County, West Virginia, are facing a burden that's over 200 times greater than others. And of course, this issue is set to be exacerbated by the race to develop Gen AI, which requires huge computing resources to train and power fast developing large language models, while simultaneously the intentionality and lack of transparency from big tech and the data center industry is increasingly used to obscure and hinder research efforts that can be used to continue quantifying the disparate health and environmental harm. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when thinking about regulatory action to address data center expansion, it's important to have a multi-pronged approach that incorporates and intersects federal, state, and local entities. Next slide, please. So first, federal level action. Thank you. So our first recommendation is that agencies such as the EPA and Department of Energy have the opportunity to lead the development of a permitting framework and accelerate the transition to cleaner and more reliable energy for data centers. So by integrating public health tools that screen air quality and use spatial data to estimate the benefits of pollution reduction, policymakers can better prioritize clean energy projects, such as small modular reactors or geothermal, that reduce both the short and long-term health harms. We also need a permitting framework that fast-tracks projects with proven air quality improvements and ensures spatial disparities are accounted for. So additionally, when we refer to fast track, we will also address the necessity of local and state participation in this framework, which I'll discuss later in the presentation. And very importantly, local environmental and health agencies have to be resourced with federal guidance and technical support in order to participate fully. Next slide, please. However, to fully understand the permitting framework and the urgency of cleaner energy over normal energy use like diesel, developing and implementing a standardized reporting framework is essential. So we recommend that the EPA and NIST lead this initiative by assembling a multi-stakeholder group, particularly one comprising of public health experts, and creating a public-facing EPA dashboard to display their findings. This dashboard would help demystify valid concerns, and it's important to require that centers regularly report their air pollutant emissions minimally on an annual basis. Next slide, please. So next, looking at state level action. Next slide, please. So although our federal recommendation to create a standardized reporting framework is important, it's only a piece of the larger regulatory puzzle. That's why we recommend that states should require a health impact assessment, or HIA, both before and after data center construction. One of the only states to have implemented an HIA was Washington State in 2020 for its data center in Quincy. For an HIA to be comprehensive, the focus should include, but not limited to, addressing cross-boundary pollution risks to ensure jurisdictional borders do not constrain public health impacts and analysis, and identifying the proximity to already overburdened communities. However, the most critical part of an HIA is the inclusion of affected communities, making sure that qualitative analysis from these communities are incorporated into the HIA, and that decision-making processes should be extended from the state to local level, further promoting transparency. Next slide, please. And states should go beyond conducting HIAs and offer state-funded community forums that provide education and integrate these concerns that are raised during these forums into an HIA. Something that's important to emphasize is that when talking about local impact, often residents, as Dr. Neese noted, do not know that a data center is being built in their community. So even if there is local consent, it doesn't equate to including the community in that decision-making process prior to an already solidified decision that a data center will be built. Next slide, please. Our next state recommendation is that states should incorporate air pollutant emissions related to data centers into their implementation for their national ambient air quality standards and the development of state implementation plans. This ensures that affected areas can meet standards and maintain their attainment statuses. To support this, states should evaluate the adequacy of existing regulatory monitors in capturing emissions related to data centers and determine whether additional monitoring infrastructure is necessary and required. Next slide, please. So last but not least, local level action. Thank you. So location is not neutral and never has been when investigating these deliberate decisions to locate power plants or factories and now data centers in regions that have already been burdened by public health challenges, especially and particularly those stemming from environmental racism and ongoing legacies of gentrification. That said, it's important to conceptualize amongst these recommendations how data centers are disproportionately impacting marginalized and low-income communities and replicating industrial harm that some communities have been facing for generations. So local governments should revise zoning regulations and include a stricter, more explicit health-based protections in these updated zoning ordinances to prevent data center clustering in overburdened communities, as well as addressing the cumulative health impacts. To better inform updating zoning ordinances, public health experts, especially those who understand the public health landscape of that particular community, should be a part of the process to ensure that the placement reflects or does not reflect community health priorities. Next slide, please. So as we grapple with this growth, advocating for transparency and cleaner energy is the only way forward to curb these inevitable impacts. I hope that the main takeaway amongst these recommendations is that knowledge does reduce fear and informed action can enable better balance to help empower communities and prevent replicating harms. Thank you, and I would love to hear any questions you may have. Next slide, please.
Awesome. Thank you, Cecilia. We do have a couple questions. The first one is, if data centers build transmission capacity behind the meter, does that reduce the capacity available to the rest of the grid?
I'll let Shalay and Adam answer this one. This is more in their aligned with their research.
Okay, I'll go first. I think this behind meter transmission capacity is sort of separate or independent from the transmission capacity elsewhere. So there's probably not much impact on the capacity available elsewhere for the rest of the grid.
Awesome. We have another question. This is from Michael. I agree these federal recommendations are important and aspirational, but given the current political landscape, I'm wondering how we envision these being implemented in practice. Do we think there's a pathway for them to gain traction, or are they more about setting a long-term vision, even if near-term enforcement may be limited? And relatedly, what role do we expect agencies like the EPA to realistically play in this? Are there encouraging signs at a state or local level?
I think that's a really valid question, especially in the political landscape right now. I think that that's something that shouldn't be overlooked, but at the same time, to have the most comprehensive recommendations is also to integrate the state and local levels. I think we're seeing a lot of movement at the local levels right now with community resilience and advocating. And I think that what's happening within the data center landscape really is indicative of a broader domino effect of what happens at the local level can transcend up to the federal level. And so I hear you, and those are, I have those same concerns, and I think the implementation feasibility is of question, but I think that's why really focusing on empowering local communities and decision-making process is of utmost importance.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think a lot of the action here will be at the local and state level first, but that, the pollution impacts and the health impacts are measurable and felt in a short term by communities, and that these communities are going to need to be heard by their representatives. And so there's more traction than you might expect at the federal level as well.
Yeah, I also like to add that if we do well, for example, if we have cleaner and stable energy, I think this can turn into huge health benefits that can provide opportunities for energy innovation or modernizing the AI infrastructures. I think, yeah, it has challenges, but also a lot of opportunities.
Awesome. Next question is from Max. I'm curious about how we ensure that impacted communities receive economic benefits rather than simply avoiding environmental harm.
That's a good question. So I think the first piece I think is really important is that, understanding, measuring, and reporting on the harm. You can't have a conversation about the economic benefits without that. And so I think that's the first piece, and that's what these recommendations are about.
And also, just to add on, there has been recent reporting about economic benefits such as job growth, which is not as broad as certain narratives who are pushing for data center expansion. It's not aligned, and so I think that more research needs to come out about what are the actual versus anticipated economic benefits to these communities before updating, recommendations and kind of learning from recent reporting that's coming out now.
I think there are also benefits in other sectors. For example, if they can innovate in the alternative fuels other than diesel backup generators, that can not only bring new opportunities for the economic development, but also mitigate the environmental harm. So, but anyway, we need to first understand the harm and put it as part of the equations.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. This one is from Brian. How are HIAs different from environmental impact statements under NEPA? Would HIAs have a mechanism to stop data center construction in the event that the HIA process reveals substantial negative impacts?
Yeah, I think that if there was an assessment and it showed that there would be significant negative impacts, then depending on the coverage and how the community feels about that, I think that it absolutely should go into consideration for stopping the construction of a data center, especially one that does not use cleaner energy sources, or if it's already an overburdened community. I think that still needs to be built out. What are the particular regulatory mechanisms in order to stop this data center construction? But the HIA, again, like knowledge is power and like promotes transparency, and the information that's done with that transparency is unknown, but I do think that it has the power to make change. Yeah, that's why it's a recommendation, but TBD.
Yes.
I would view this as a stronger push for cleaner energy and cleaner and stable energy adoptions, such as nuclear power, because just like we don't have enough power capacity available right now, and that pushes data center to become more flexible, and they are using load shifting to move away the workload when the power capacity is not enough. So this, if there's a significant health impact, then I think this provides a more opportunity, that stronger push for data centers to adopt cleaner energy.
Awesome. Thank you, Cecilia, Sholi, and Adam. We are going to move to our next presenter, which is Costa. I will pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Megan, and to FAS, and pleasure to be with you all and with these great panelists today. I'm going to talk about an opportunity to use competitive prizes to get more clean energy and clean data centers that use that clean energy onto the grid. This is a graph of, or this is a chart of the data centers in the United States. And what we see is that they're starting to develop not just where in historical patterns of development where there was rivers or there was population, but where there's energy and where there's fiber optics. And so that is really important on how we think about the growth of data centers in the country over time to make sure that we have the opportunity to connect these to clean power. Next slide, please. We heard about the challenges of data center electricity growth, both in the United States and around the world, with significant concentration in specific states, but that is growing beyond those borders. Next slide, please. And we also heard that AI and data center electricity demand could be more than 6 to 12% of U.S. electricity by 2028. There's still lots of uncertainty around what the future electricity demand would be. It's our job in the scholarly literature and in policy to make sure that we have better futures and robust futures, no matter what the projections end up being. Next slide, please. We also heard Dr. Neese talk a little bit about the interconnection queue, which is the number of power plants that are waiting to get onto the grid after they complete a number of studies to see if their connection to the grid is going to require additional infrastructure. Now, what's important to understand about the interconnection queue, one, is that there's so many power plants waiting to get connected that it's more than 2 times the total amount of power plants that we have already, and that 95% of the capacity waiting to be connected is solar storage or wind power. Now, not all of that will get connected. In fairness, not most of that will get connected because a lot of these projects drop out. But we need to make sure that the clean energy that is waiting to get connected finds its way onto the grid sooner than later. Next slide, please. So what I want to talk about is a smart AI fast lanes policy. This policy framework addresses supply, so more clean energy supply, efficiency, so making sure that we have the most efficient data centers that we have, that we can have, infrastructure, both in the transmission and distribution side, so that communities aren't bearing the brunt of additional infrastructure investments, and then flexibility, so that these new large loads are able to be integrated into the system with minimal impacts, minimal pollution, and minimal cost. Next slide, please. So the opportunity that I'm talking about in my policy brief is to use what's called the Foundation for Energy Security and Innovation, or FESI. FESI is the nonprofit that supports the Department of Energy and was created in the CHIPS and Science Act. Congress has created many of these foundations that support agencies over the years, including the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the Foundation for NIH, and the National Park Foundation, which was created nearly 100 years ago. These types of foundations can leverage the capabilities of the private sector, academia, and philanthropies to push in additional external investment into projects that support the mission of the agency. Next slide, please. So the first recommendation for this Smart AI Fast Lane is to clear the interconnection queue with clean power by offering large loads like data centers the opportunity to use a fee to connect to the grid without first completing lengthy pre-connection cost studies. Now, there may be infrastructure required, which is why we do those studies. So instead, by paying a fee could go into a fund managed by FESI to cover these infrastructure costs so that they're not borne by communities or by regional grids. But FESI could also award prize funding. So that's one of the things that is unique about these types of organizations, that they can do prize funding. And those could be for double the amount of clean energy that the data center will be using annually. So if a data center wanted to come to a region, FESI could assemble resources from the government, from private and philanthropic sources to ensure that there was enough clean energy for the data center and to share with the community. Next slide, please. The second recommendation is to establish world-leading innovation in energy and water efficiency with data centers. We really need a miles per gallon, or an MPG, for how AI data centers perform work. We heard in the first presentation about new ways to do this. Previous iterations of efficiency metrics in data centers have focused largely on cooling, and that was important because a lot of improvements in efficiency and cooling has happened. We still have a ways to go, but we need to broaden the conversation from only cooling to some of the things that we heard about in the first presentation: the life cycle impacts, the local impacts, the community impacts, and the opportunity to understand how to maximize the amount of work that we get out of a data center for the energy and water that we use. So FESI can use prizes to meet efficiency targets. These types of things will also create, besides innovation, it creates the open data and transparency that we need and the communities are asking for. Next slide, please. So I got the bullets wrong on this one, but the third recommendation is to use prizes to invest in regional and local grid infrastructure. One, by reconductoring or grid enhancing technologies or new transmission in areas where data centers are being installed. And then two, by having prize money or philanthropic money and federal money to upgrade local grid infrastructure so that communities aren't bearing the brunt of paying for the reinvestment in their local grid infrastructure. Next slide, please. And then the last recommendation that we have is develop prizes that reward flexibility and end-use efficiency investments. Now, when I talk about by flexibility, I'm showing a graph here that from the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory about data center electricity use over the span of minutes. And you can see it ramps up and down pretty quickly, depending on the types of workloads that these data centers are using. There's an opportunity to design data center algorithms and data center operations to ensure that there's flexibility so that we can use data centers at times where there's the minimum amount of emissions, or we can use data centers and design data center operations so that they are not a large impact on the grid, especially on hot peak summer days like we're experiencing today. There's another opportunity to use prizes for flexibility, and that is to have the communities that are hosting data centers receive federal, local, and philanthropic resources to reduce their summer peak and winter peak loads so that there is headroom in that local grid, and the consumers will benefit from lower electricity demand and prices. And then finally, we could use prizes for utilities that are hosting data centers that deploy virtual power plants. These are things like aggregated heat pumps and electric vehicles, heat pump water heaters, and other end-use devices that can be tuned and aggregated so that there's not a giant spike of demand on the grid. Next slide, please. It's important to understand that data centers and AI are only part of anticipated electricity growth. Electric vehicles might be more than half of electricity growth. Homes and factories might be, of electrification of homes and factories might be another 30%, with data centers projected to be about 20% of the future growth. So we need to make sure that we're integrating and managing the new loads from data centers efficiently, equitably, and with no pollution, so that we can manage the rest of this electrification that we need to do to manage climate change. Next slide, please. So I'll finish there by saying we've heard a lot about the opportunity to improve innovation in data centers and make them cleaner, more efficient, and more equitable. It's important that we understand that the data center challenge represents a test of how we as a society are going to address broader electrification. And so that's why I like to say that the climate energy implications from AI data centers is small on a percentage basis, but really how we handle it is huge. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Costa. I'm going to mix two questions into one because they are related. But we have, are there existing examples of these innovation prizes being successful in the past, and would prize funding be available to researchers based outside the US?
There are existing examples. Prizes are generally successful when there are an important target or goal, but the way that you reach that target is unknown or has many different pathways. And so, for example, the United States Department of Agriculture has a prize to understand how to ensure that you can test the sex of an egg from a chicken so that they can improve efficiency and reduce waste in the food system. The important piece for this is that the prize is both spurs competition, but also enables a policy vehicle for both the government and philanthropy and the private sector to work together in a public-private partnership to push additional resources into communities that are badly needed. The question was about, are resources available outside the United States? If there was a tech prize, like the development of a new data center, a new algorithm, absolutely. I think for local infrastructure, I think that would be limited to the United States.
Thank you. Our next question is, how might your proposed fast lines framework provide benefits to communities where new builds are being proposed and approved?
The most important thing for the growth of data centers, both here and around the world, is that there needs to be a social license to operate in a way that the communities can benefit. And so what the first recommendation of this fast lanes proposal does is say, not only bring your own power, but bring enough power so that the local community can both have cleaner air and have lower cost and benefit from clean power. The third recommendation is really important, and this is where both the federal and philanthropic and other resources can improve the local distribution grids, because this has been a large driver of cost of electricity over the last 5 years, is the electricity rate cases in local communities where utilities have had to upgrade their infrastructure due to new demands.
Thank you. Our next question. Data center flexibility is a very important topic and can bring important benefits to the grid and reducing peak load, but it could also mean firing up on-site diesel generators, which could be tens or hundreds of megawatts. How can we encourage data center flexibility without negatively impacting local air quality from diesel generators?
Very important issue, and that local generation, like on-site diesel generators, should not be used as a power source for data centers under normal operations. Some data centers may need to have these as for emergency operations, but there should not be a local microgrid with diesel generators as part of the power system. We need a clean, affordable, reliable, and equitable power system that can provide the amount of electricity we need for data centers and all the other things that we need to electrify without relying on local diesel generators, which are really only an emergency backstop.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Costa. We are going to move on to our next presenter, which is Shane.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you, FAS, for having me. Thanks to my fellow presenters and everyone tuning in. I am Shane Londigan, Senior Policy Advisor here at Third Way, here to bring us home on this last presentation, which is focused largely on what are the opportunities that we have from the development of AI? How can AI be more sensibly and equitably and thoughtfully incorporated into the larger project of grid modernization, which I wrote down something Cecilia just said, we are at an inflection point in which policy intervention is necessary. That is most certainly true for where we are in our broader power sector electric grid policy environment. Our grid is a modern marvel. It is the largest machine humanity has ever built, but it is woefully out of date for the current moment. It's been built over the last 100 years, and we now need to rapidly modernize it and expand it for the next 100. So AI certainly is not without its challenges, but I thought it would be interesting to maybe talk a little bit about some of its opportunities as well. Next slide, please. So my memo is largely based on a really impressive report that the U.S. Department of Energy put out last year called the AI for Energy report. There was also a larger technical working paper that the national labs put out. And what they did was identify these 14 bullet points you see that are AI use cases that could help modernize our electrical grid. And they spaced them out over these kind of 4 categories that you see here, which form the framing for the rest of this presentation, and then my memo as well. So the 4 categories kind of span the pre-construction to the operations of our grid here, starting, of course, with the grid planning activities. You can think of these like all the activities that go into before we actually start even permitting different infrastructure. So deciding where we need upgrades on our distribution systems, what substations need to be expanded, what is the type of joint infrastructure planning we could be doing with our transportation system to align more EV chargers with the larger electrification needed. Yeah, of course, there's been a lot of great talk about the interconnection queue, both on this call and then here in DC. That certainly needs to be sped up, right? Those times are only increasing. AI can help there. So that's kind of that bucket of pre-construction activities. The next one is the siting and permitting aspects of grid modernization activities. This includes everything from how to speed up the process of not just applying for a permit, but how do we find different local jurisdictions in which we can site new solar and wind projects? How can we better site and more equitably site interregional transmission lines? Then how can we speed up the review process of those permits? Of course, our permitting process is very fragmented here in the US. It exists across state, local, regional, and federal jurisdictions, and that makes for a very complicated and complex process of bringing new infrastructure online. Thirdly would be the grid operations and reliability. This is the real-time management of this extremely complex system. Grid operators are managing electrons that are being balanced based on supply and demand down to the millisecond across thousands of miles, across dozens of different jurisdictions throughout extreme weather events like we are seeing right now here on the East Coast, to more moderate climates like the West Coast is currently experiencing. It's a very complex set of interactions that AI certainly has some exciting potential there to improve. And then the last one gets at one of the larger challenges we're currently seeing. This was before the advent of AI, and we're going to continue to see it into the rest of this century. And that is just the more extreme events we are seeing, both from the physical events like weather, both in record heat and winter storms like we've seen in the last couple of years, from winter storms in Texas to extreme heat here in DC, but also the cyber activity that we're seeing. Much more sophisticated state and non-state actors across the globe engage in cyber warfare to degrade the potential, degrade the efficacy of our electrical grid system. So all that to say, there's 14 pretty interesting use cases for AI here, but not all of these use cases are created equal. This memo was focused on what the federal government can do to expedite grid modernization activities. And so that means with limited resources, with limited time, and in our current political climate, as one of the previous questions hinted at, we should really be focusing our efforts on the use cases that have the highest impact potential and demonstrate the most feasible levels of deployment readiness. Next slide, please, Megan. So how do we figure that out? Well, we created a scale that does that. All 6 of these questions were placed against those 14 different use cases, scored from 0 to 5 for each question. On the readiness side, we look at 3 different scales, and then on the impact side, we also look at 3 scales. Those are then averaged to give us a readiness score and an impact score for each 14 of those use cases. And then when we move to the next slide here, we'll see how those are plotted. We're then able to kind of plot these 14 use cases on a coordinate plane here. You'll see on the x-axis, we have our readiness scores. On the y-axis, we have our impact scores. And I think this is a really interesting way to think about AI's potential here, because not only are you able to see where the clustering takes place, where most of these AI tools are ready to go, but you're also able to think more clearly about where we should be focusing, where the US government should be focusing its efforts on. And that would be largely the top right and top left quadrants, the ones that are shaded green and shaded yellow. For the ones that are in the top right, the shaded green, these are technologies that largely are either in pilot or large-scale demonstration currently with utilities across the US. Those are ones that have demonstrated pretty high levels of technical and regulatory readiness, and they have pretty impressive impact potential. The ones that are on the top left there, the yellow shaded area, those are ones that show promise, but we need a bit more investment to unlock and scale those and then move those towards the right side. And then the ones on the bottom here, if something were to fall there, those are ones that we maybe don't necessarily need federal government involvement in, and that's something we should just be monitoring private sector action. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through briefly here each of those 4 categories, highlight some of the key insights that we found from this scoring exercise, then go through a policy recommendation for each one, as well as highlighting some of the next steps that we would need to arrive there. On the key insights for the grid planning side of things, what we found here is that these activities, more applications, experience the highest financial and regulatory hurdles. However, they are quite technically mature. There are pilot projects across the US, again, for trying to better understand where we should allocate new resources, where those capital projects should be potentially sited and built. AI is already being used there. However, because of our fragmented grid regulatory environment and the way it is managed, there is just not clear consensus. And so it is certainly holding back some technology companies or utilities from wanting to implement something at scale. So what do we need to do to try and expedite this, if that's something we're looking to do here? We need federal clarity. We need federal support, and FERC is the entity that would handle that best. We need a kind of operationalized pathway so that folks have confidence that when using these AI tools, they're not only compliant with FERC regulations, but they're also doing so in a way that, you know, isn't bringing about reliability or economic harms. To do that, the best way is probably a technical working group. I can feel half this webinar giving an eye roll about an interagency working group, but because there's so many folks that are going to get that will be kind of involved or impacted by AI and grid planning activities, FERC, the Department of Energy, and our regional transmission organizations are the ones to kind of develop these standards, transparency requirements, and of course, procedural integration where these tools are fitting into the process. Next slide, please. On the siting and permitting aspect, our siting and permitting process, as I said, is extremely complex in the US, but a lot of these tools are ready to go. These are largely just large language models that are ciphering through thousands of pages of environmental reviews and trying to not only see how compliant they are, but find better ways to do them in the future. However, there is a lot of institutional distrust here and a very complicated regulatory environment because all those jurisdictions have their own set of permitting procedures. That being said, tools in this category do have extremely high value. They can rapidly increase the time or increase the speed in which we permit projects in the US, but they're pretty niche in their application, right? They're not like the grid planning tools that are unlocking deeper distributed energy resource or grid enhancing technology or VPP integration. These are pretty narrow applications for AI. That being said, a simple step forward here is for the Permitting Council, which is based out of the White House, alongside CEQ, which was recently the Council on Environmental Equality, which was recently just given a presidential memorandum, to work together to publish and set new data modernization standards across all the agencies that do permitting in the federal government. So it's a lot of agencies: Interior, Fish and Wildlife, BLM, DOE. We need standard data modernization across that so folks have structured data and know what they're trying to achieve. There is also a congressional bill here, the E-Permit Act, which if it hasn't been introduced, it will be introduced soon. Next slide. Okay, real-time operations here. A lot of these technologies are already being used, not just in the power sector, but across industry writ large. Other industries writ large, you know, these are ready now cases. And beyond that, we score them quite high on the fit category because AI can perform these real-time calculations a lot faster than, you know, my pen and paper when I used to be a grid manager. So this is a really interesting use case for AI technologies here. To do that, we'd like to see something similar to what Costa just pitched. I tagged the Grid Deployment Office at the Department of Energy, but FESI is also a great choice. DOE has a long history of doing deployment challenges like this, from the Sunshot Initiative in 2011 to the storage challenge, the Grand Energy Storage Challenge of 2020 to the Earthshots of last year. A deployment challenge at DOE that funds more demonstration projects across the country via maybe some matching grants or performance-based incentives feels like a logical next step here. Last one. Grid resilience. Again, this is a very complex cross-jurisdictional area of coordination across our grid. It reaches across emergency managers at FEMA. It reaches across regulators at FERC, as well as DOE's involvement. So here we suggest a kind of cross-jurisdictional program that DOE and FEMA run, but in consultation with FERC, that can kind of set a new standard for both supporting ongoing demonstration projects, but setting a playbook and clarifying the regulatory pathway for when we use AI tools to, island microgrids or detect new faults in the grid or bring resources back online. A lot of that needs new standards because it's a new technology that grid managers are not yet used to using. And so coordinating that at the federal government level probably makes the most sense. So that is where I will wrap. I have a final slide here, just highlighting things, but I'm happy to kind of start taking some questions here, looking at the time.
Awesome. Thank you, Shane. First question is, how could federal policy incentivize data interoperability across regional grids and utilities while preserving cybersecurity and data privacy?
Yeah, it's an amazing question. And, to score this, I talked to a lot of those regulators. I talked to a lot of utilities. That is the hardest part, right? Because all of, a lot of both the permitting side of the house, but also the planning side of the house is all confidential and all kept within the utility or the RTO. So you don't want to necessarily have a federal repository or database in which everything is just dumped in there and folks can cipher through it, which is why FERC, I did not tag NERC here, which is our National Energy Reliability Commission, one of those. But they need to set some type of data privacy standards. They need to have structured data for that. And hopefully that is the guidance that then gets sent down to the regional transmission or ISOs to implement in their regions.
Awesome. The next question is, how should federal funding balance support between high readiness, moderate impact tools and high impact, low readiness opportunities?
Okay, so the first one, I think we'd like to see a lot more support for demonstration projects. There's, I don't know if we're going to send these slides around, but in my memo, I have a list of a couple dozen different technology AI applications that are currently already being used throughout the US. And there's more in the memo here. But we'd like to see federal support for these throughout. These are very niche. Most of these are happening just either with one utility as a pilot project, or maybe like Google's Tapestry is being done with PJM, the RTO. But the federal government can help kind of standardize the way these are working and, scale them beyond just those kind of unique one-off cases. FERC can also require the consideration of AI tools for the most part right now when they incentivize new technology like grid enhancing technologies. They largely just suggest or recommend that RTOs consider those new technologies, but stronger statutory guidance from Congress to FERC can then require the consideration or implementation of these rather than just consider it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think we are going to turn now to Kelly Fleming, who is going to close us out.
I was just talking on mute in 2025. Hi, my name's Kelly Fleming. I wanted to introduce myself. I lead the Clean Energy program here at the Federation of American Scientists. I want to thank you all for attending our webinar. As we wrap up this AI and energy policy sprint, we're really excited to have all of these memos published on our website by the end of this week. Please reach out to the speakers whose emails you can see on the screen right there. If you have any questions or would like to partner on helping us get some of these policies actually implemented at the state and federal level. And you can see emails for Ollie and me as well. So please reach out if you have other ideas around AI and energy. And thank you so much. That's all we have for you today.